Let's say you got bent valves on an Audi 2.0T. You need to remove the cylinder head. It's possible to actually remove the cylinder head without the front core support in service position, but most people are going to want to take this core support in service position, remove the front bumper. I've got a different video on that. Pretty easy. You basically just take this whole piece right here and move it out a little bit, or you can take it completely off, like I've got in this vehicle right here. We just put it in service position first, and then we took it completely off. One of the next things you're going to want to do is remove the turbocharger. Now, you could take the cylinder head off with the turbocharger still on it, but if you're replacing the cylinder head, you're going to need to have the turbocharger off anyway, and it's not necessary to take it away from the vehicle. You'll have to do a few things. You're going to have to unbolt this catalytic converter and slide the catalytic converter back. You're going to have to take off this heat shield, and you're going to have to unbolt it and pop it out of its tabs. So this heat shield has 3 bolts on it. You're going to have to take out these 5 bolts on the top, and you're going to have to take out this 1 bolt on the bottom right here and bend this tab out of the way. First, let's go ahead and get that 13mm off. We're going to use a ratchet wrench and get to it from this back side here. Now, there's some limited room here with this engine mount perch, but even with a ratchet wrench, you can get it on there and unbolt this thing. Really rusty. The bolt is fighting me all the way. There we are. Now we're just going to gently pry this back. We're probably going to have to put a screwdriver or a pry bar in there so this doesn't get on our way. But you see, in my case, I just pushed it with my thumb, and there's enough room here for it to clear. Now we'll move up here to this heat shield, and there's going to be hex or triple square on these top 2, and this bottom one is always a hex. Unfortunately, this one's already removed. I did a different video on how to remove this. You typically have to put a long 6mm in there. It's hard to get to, and if you're not careful, that bolt right there will strip out or it'll break your tool. If you're using a ball hex, a lot of times it breaks the ball off. These 2 on the side here are really easy. These are triple squares, I think maybe 10mm. So we'll remove those and pull this off. Now, in my experience, the penetrating oil never really penetrates, but it does help to pre-spray it, because if you get any movement at all, that will assist the penetrating. So I'm just going to kind of blindly squirt back there to try to get those other 2. Now we're going to use our double boxed end wrench, 15mm. And of course, you always want to start with the solid side, not the ratchet side. It's like a breaker bar. And it's 12 point because that gives us the biggest range of motion. It doesn't give us the most grip, but we can get it at better angles. So when possible, always push with your palm open. If you push with a closed palm, you could bust your knuckles, but you're usually in a better chance of not hurting yourself if you push with an open palm. And I usually like to give it some mini jolts as well, but once you break it loose, it's a good idea to go back and forth a little bit, and that's what really kind of gets that penetrating oil in. And if you want to be extra careful, get a little bit behind there now that you broke it loose. Ratchet wrench side now. It's still a little bit stiff. If it starts to get stiff enough to where you're going to worry about it, then go back to tightening it again, and then go back to loosening it. Because it'll just keep on getting more and more stiff, damaging the threads. So now we're about all the way off with it. Probably get it by hand. I always just usually put these on this stud. Usually this one and this one's gone as well, so I usually just stack these up on those studs. See if this one will break loose. Open palm, because hear it snap loose. I flip it around to a better angle. Still really stiff, so then tighten it again and then loosen it. All right, still not ready for the ratchet wrench in my opinion. Let's get one more if we can. There we go. All right, now let's go to the ratchet wrench side. Other way. It's still too stiff to really, but I'm gonna keep on going with it and we'll see if it snaps, because I don't really care. Really too stiff. Get to a little bit better of an angle, but you see I still only got a few clicks every time, and this is just frustrating. And wanting to slip off again, you really got to pay attention to keep it on there straight. It's finally starting to get see, to be able to fit my whole hand in here to get the most clicks, I have to move the wrench sideways a little bit. That's why it's wanting to slip off. I could be real proper with it, but then I'd only get like one click. See that? That's perfectly straight. So a ratchet wrench that has a flex head on it would actually help you in this scenario. Now these last two I can usually get with an impact, but I don't have this removable firewall out of the way. It's still intact, but you can remove this quite easily. We're gonna try to get to it without doing so, which I very rarely do. But we're gonna slide this in here. This is a deep 15 with a wobble extension on it. Let's see if I can fit this. You can barely see it there. Fit that right there. And now I'm gonna try to tuck this M12 impact back there. This might not be strong enough, but I'm gonna kind of fish this thing back in here, twist it sideways. So now I'm fully on it. I'm gonna hit the trigger. Just not enough. Just for good measure, we're gonna try to tighten it first and then loosen it. Nope. Next I'll be trying my basic M18 non-fuel with the XC 3.0 battery. We'll see if we can get this bigger, fatter one tucked in, which will be more difficult, especially with that bigger battery, even though it's a 3 amp hour. I believe it will fit. Finally got it. Let's try that last bottom. Now to get to that last bottom one, I usually get this hand right here, my right hand in there with the socket and extension, and I guide it with this hand right here so I can feel where it is. I pull it right in. We're on top of it. Now I'm gonna hit the trigger on that bottom one. Uh-oh. Slipped off. See, I'm at a bad angle. Gotta readjust, folks. Now we have the brushless fuel with the same battery on it. That battery was fully charged. Now it's down to 3 bars. You'll just have to take my word for it. I'm trying to get through this thing now that the sun's kind of closing in on me. Gonna get dark here soon. See those fancy lights in there? We're on it. Gotta get back in here to actually hit the trigger. Surprisingly, still nothing. Now this does not have enough power to snap that bolt. We're gonna have to hit it with the breaker bar, folks. Breaker bar it is. Actually, while I was taking it off, I did the tighten trick and then the loosen, and then that's what got it. Now it's loose. I just gotta fish this big fat thing out of this firewall area. So much more difficult to get to these bolts without this firewall removed. I would suggest removing this, especially because it's so easy to do so. Now sometimes I can move this catalytic converter out of the way. You have to be a little bit careful with it because there is a flex joint back there, but you can usually get just a little bit of movement out there. I can't push it by hand this time, so I usually like to put the pry bar right here and then kind of put it up against my hip and push into it. And that's not working either because this thing is extremely rusty, as you can tell. I don't really advise doing this because if you get the pry bar in there far enough, you can actually hit the fins on the turbo. So if you do this, you have to be extremely careful to just only put the tip on the edge and then work it off a little bit like that. So now it's all the way off. That's all we're really trying to do is just push it back a couple inches and it will move on that bracket. The bracket's just gonna tilt back a little bit and then the whole exhaust is just gonna move back a little bit. So you're not really putting that stress on the flex pipe, but those flex pipes are already known to be a little bit weak. I don't really see them bust open, but the outer sheathing, no matter what, even before you touch it, look at it before you touch it because that outer sheathing on the flex joint is probably torn off the edges. I'm just saying, that's how they always look even before you do anything. And I know that that's a risky move. Some people would say not to do that, but there's not really too many ways around it. And now we're gonna take off these top 12mm bolts. This is already loose right here with this T30, but it might not be a bad idea to get this one loose right here or to get it loose down there so you don't put some stress on this pipe as well. So I got that same wobble extension that I just used for that catalytic converter, and I got my 12mm semi-deep snap-on socket. We're gonna tuck it right in here to get the hardest one out at the end. And then I could use an impact for that. So we'll just go ahead and grab our impact for this one. Slide it on there. All right. Tap the nut out. Move on to number 2, which is right here. Tap that nut out right here. Number 3. All right, number 4. And number 5, probably. I'm a little bit at a precarious angle here. Number 5 still came out. That's all we gotta get, folks. Now we can just simply pop it straight out. What I would suggest is spray the flange area with a little bit of lubrication, especially that bottom section if you can get it down in there in the bottom, because that's where it's gonna wanna stick. So spray in those little crevices. All right. Now, you can try the wiggle, but you're probably not gonna have any success whatsoever. No, that thing is jammed in there. The push on the turbo a little bit, right down low here. You could do this a variety of different ways. There we go. See how I just tilted it out? That's what broke it loose from its cold fusion. Now we should be able to pop it loose the rest of the way. Let's make sure that these nuts are all the way off. Typically put some type of jack underneath it to push it up, to twist it out. and this is going to be difficult to show with one hand. I doubt that I'm going to be able to pull it off, even with it busted loose like that. So I'm just going to kind of set the phone right here now that you see what I'm doing. Let's see if it sets there. All right. You see, all I had to do was to put this pry bar in here. You have to be careful about this wastegate diaphragm, but I put it this way right here and just popped it out. Then once it's out a little bit, you might be able to go to the back here and do the same thing in the back. Just kind of pop it out. I usually jack up this, put a jack underneath here and jack up this snout to do that, and then all you have to do is push it back a little bit. So it has to go up and then tilt back. There's a variety of different ways that you can do that, but all you really need to do is just have this sit there. You don't need to take it all the way out. I didn't unbolt these. I didn't unbolt this line from the block. I didn't unbolt any of these lines from the turbo, and this gives me plenty of room to dismantle the timing chain, the cylinder head, and put it all back together, and then I can just pop it right back on that two lower support beams right here, and then bolt it in from the top again. Of course, you have to replace your gasket.